Greetings, one and all. My first note is, please turn off your cell phones. And actually, I don't think I did that. I'll do it in a minute. On behalf of Studio L, I welcome you here today. It's poignant to realize that when we first started planning this event, it was to be a centennial celebration. Leslie was still vibrant and active, and there was a show of his work up at the Bruno David Gallery. Poignant indeed. September 11th may seem like an odd choice for a celebration of a life, but here we are. Remembering one very significant individual. Many of you, like me, may also be reflecting on people you lost on that day 20 years ago, or on account of it later. And that is as it should be. I would like to welcome our first speaker, Heather Woofter, and come on up.
The mask is tangled in my glasses, sorry. Good morning. I am honored to share a few reflections celebrating Leslie Laskey, Professor Emeritus of Architecture at Washington University in St. Louis. Leslie arrived in St. Louis in 1956 as an assistant professor under the leadership of Dean Buford Pickens, teaching in the foundation design curriculum. He was widely recognized for his 35 years of teaching at WashU, receiving the Distinguished Faculty Award in 1982 and from the ACSA in 1986, the Dean's Medal from the School of Architecture in 2004, and the Sam Fox School in 2015. He studied at the Institute of Design in Chicago and later at the University of Indiana. His education was heavily influenced by the experimental, multidisciplinary work of the Bauhaus School and the teachings of Moholy Nagy. Dean Passano initiated the legacy of the 4+2 program in his time, a liberal arts education along with a 4-year design curriculum. He stated that the school should not be afraid of scholarship negatively impacting creativity, while admitting that the foundational design classes were Trojan horses meant to lure students into a lifelong pursuit of architecture. This was the domain and the space in which Leslie taught. The culture was one of intense conversations at dinners and studio experimentation with distinguished visitors filling the school. Gay Laberbaum, one of our most senior faculty members, recalls these events and the critiques as transformational to her education. She says, "Each of us would take turns sharing our projects. I still realize, as if I were listening just now to Leslie, that it felt as it is when you are reading something, eye-opening, that it felt as it is when you are seeing springtime suddenly appear, that I would be amazed to realize that in my projects, how very much more there was for me to discover." I think her words, shared to celebrate his birthday a bit early, resonate with all of us. For the past 13 years, the College of Architecture has held an annual charrette sponsored by Studio L, the Laskey Charrette. The weekend brings together second-year architecture students working in teams on a design challenge. Prominent guests, architects, designers, artists collaborate with faculty to create a prompt, seeking cross-disciplinary boundaries through their backgrounds and also the projects themselves. Thank you to Studio L for introducing Laskey's influence to our students through this charrette. From Constance Vail, undergraduate chair and faculty coordinator for several of these events, it is the work of a teacher to provoke curiosity, to remember that the mystery of what you are searching for is more interesting than what you already know. This is exactly what Leslie Laskey modeled in his life. I believe that Leslie is here with us today. His charismatic presence and boundless energies fill Graham Chapel through all of you. He certainly wouldn't want to miss this celebration of life with his good friends. Yet though my imagination is strong, I'm not picturing Leslie sitting among us. Instead, I recall Leslie planning, his intent to bring us here together in this space and fellowship. Leslie's spirit is an ongoing conduit, a life, a pulse, to collect the people that he held dear. Leslie was very kind to me. We spoke on educational models, curriculum, and pathways forward in architecture. In some of Leslie's work, he found objects, reassembled them, saw opportunities in a new light. Similarly, Laskey brought people together and didn't let go. No matter a student or a teacher, he challenged us through questions. From the well-known quote, "A man's friendships are one of the best measures of their worth." Leslie kept in touch, and he did the hard work to keep us all together. A consummate teacher, he modeled ambition and curiosity, not for recognition, but for the act of doing. Productivity fueled a good life, and as part of the greatest generation, he exhibited courage in strength of mind and purpose. Leslie had great hands. They were still strong a few weeks before his 100th birthday when he gripped my hand to say hello. He asked about the school. He always asked about Evan and how I was refueling my energy to stay whole. In a room full of flowers, objects, newspapers, tea on the table, we talked. As he spoke, his hand made this gesture, like a swirling of the hands as if to express the space between the words. There were questions he often left hanging in the air to contemplate between us. Thank you.
Have you ever watched dragonflies on a warm summer day? How they fly in what seems like all directions at once, up, down, sideways, backwards. And beyond that, exceptional behavior, where we have the ability to take in the world using 3 colors, red, green, blue. They register the world in up to 30 different color registers. Even more remarkable, they have essentially 360-degree vision. Imagine ability to perceive such a wealth of color, to absorb stimuli from all directions at once, of being able to maneuver in multiple dimensions. That was our Leslie. He was like one spectacular dragonfly. In the 50 years of being his perpetual student, and I mean, once a student of Leslie, you're always a student of Leslie. I got to spend time with him and Frank, in many places, Puerto Rico, Key West, various states, Eastern Europe, Japan. And in all places, he was always the same, very calm, very observing, making connections. Where I would see a beautiful building on a walk, he would see shadows on the ground of the rafter tails overhead. His ability to hover mentally in multi-directions allowed him to see and interpret so far beyond what my sight, my mind could embrace. He guided through enigmatic words, crazy riddles, perplexing actions, pinching, to help us register the things in between. He was engaged in connecting the dots, seeing the spaces between the dots, or seeing the lines or the shadows of the lines where maybe there were no lines, but there were still shadows and there were still spaces. He saw in dimensions beyond the norm. And therefore, logically, he viewed himself in control. He knew himself to be in control. He always controlled, which did not always shake out so well for the rest of us. No question he could be kind and thoughtful, but man, he could be intimidating. Not just in the classroom, not just in the art studio, but in the kitchen. Don't wash the dishes that way, or don't eat your grapefruit that way. Or driving. Did you ever have the opportunity to have him drive you somewhere? Hitting the brakes, pounding on the horn at perceived injustices that had yet to occur. Flying full tilt out of intersections. I mean, I'm not sure what he was seeing, but I was seeing red flashing danger and thinking, dragonflies should not drive cars. It's amazing that man lived 100 years. He drove his way, not the conventional way, not the easy way, but his way with intense purpose. And then he took that remarkable ability to see and perceive and that intense sense of purpose and used it to connect us all. He was the grand connector. The Sunday brunches with folks of all ages and disciplines. He just loved the stimulation of people, of ideas. Think of the hours jammed around that little kitchen table. The TV's on, the radio's on, newspaper articles are being quoted, images from magazines thrust in front of you, friends flowing in and out, and all the time he's continuing to work on his art. I mean, who else? He brought forward the unconventional. He made things challenging, uncomfortable. If there are two things that do not describe Leslie, they are comfort and convention. I think he thought they promote laziness. They lure us into not bothering to see the surprises that are all around us. He brought us together. He challenged us. We supported him. His ability to perceive the remarkable led a group of us in 2005 to form Studio L at WashU. Studio L will continue to support Leslie into the future. His unique manner of instilling passion and curiosity in students will not go away. One person supported Leslie above and beyond all. Frank led the march in being committed to the greatness that was and remains Leslie. He showed unrelenting commitment for 62, 63 years. Because of Frank, we have the Columbia Foundation that will honor Leslie's work into the future. Because of Frank, we had the Leslie we knew. There's only been one Leslie in this world. We were lucky to be in that world with him. He brought so much forward to so many lives, and he will continue to do so. I noticed in the days right after he died that my vision shifted a bit. The forms and the shadows around me were just a bit clearer, a bit more distinct. It's my belief, I know, maybe a little crazy, but it's my belief, that when Leslie J. Laskey departed this world that we are still in, he sent some of his remarkable ability to perceive to each of us, so that by paying attention, maintaining our curiosity, continuing to work, we will carry on some of his dragonfly self.
Good morning. Good morning. Laskey came into our lives back in 2008. We were both first semester grad students, and there was a call for entries for the Laskey Award, a $5,000 grand prize. And at the time, it could have been $1 million. It almost seemed like too much money, so I wanted to enter the competition, and I needed someone to do it with. So I asked Justin to take on this competition with me. And I wish I could tell you I asked Justin because we had some deep-seated friendship or some like-mindedness, but honestly it was because he sat right across from me in studio first semester, and he was the only person I had spoken with for more than 4 hours. Obviously he said yes, and we, fast forward a few weeks, we win first prize, and normally that would be the end of the design journey. We submitted a design and we win, but it was actually just the beginning of this endeavor for us to meet Leslie Laskey.
In a world of named scholarships and memorial chairs, we thought Laskey might be just another name or just another award. But in winning, Roberto and I found that it wasn't that way. It wasn't just another award. It was a personal invitation. Our engagement with him started at breakfast, again confounding the way projects were typically started in graduate school or in architecture at large, for that matter. The narrow doors of Leslie's house led the way to a world that was much like him. It was full of curiosity, complex, creative, sometimes unusual, and infinitely varied. Laskey would make breakfast, letting the dog in and out from the garden, asking personal questions to 2 graduate students still wondering what they had won. We would move to the oak table in the dining room that was finished with Ajax, and the conversation would move to architecture a bit. But the table was the first lesson. Many things have a use, but there's no reason not to misuse them or try new things or experiment in search of something more. Our time with Laskey was serious but casual, something really rare in my relationships with teachers throughout my time at WashU.
We'd frequent weekends at Laskey's. He would invite us over for brunch. I'm sure some of you would share that with us. And during these times, we would go over our designs with him to show him what we were working with, what we were planning on doing. And at the time, there was a large push for these beautiful, digitally fabricated, ocular-centric structures. But what we came up with, to us, felt flat. I think Laskey could sense that. We would apprehensively show him what we had designed, and we were hungry for answers or for some sort of guidance, but instead he would respond with questions. And the biggest question was, how does this make you feel? And at the time, that was so strange for a professor to ask me to justify our designs through feelings, through subjectivity, not through rationale, not through efficiency. And he really challenged us. He really challenged us to design something that we would be proud of, that it would be through our feelings. He challenged us to design something that would make us happy.
The landscape that we ended up designing became the center of public life for the remainder of our time in graduate school. It hosted lunch, class, and happy hour every Friday. It moved the public life of the school from the periphery, the area along Forsyth where we would have happy hours or lunch at our desks. It brought it out into the plaza at the center of the Sam Fox School. creating this humane intervention in the center of campus. It was to remain for only a year, but it ended up lasting for more than 5, breaking expectations and extending its influence to thousands of students. But that was not the main way that it was like Leslie. The landscape became a connector of people and ideas. Laskey began Roberto and I's relationship, and as evidenced in this room, he's connected many, many more than that. In our friendship and all of our work, his influence lives on. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Robert Duffy. In 2012, I wrote an obituary for a truly wonderful woman and artist named Marjorie Heltzel. I recall that she and her colleague and friend, artist Jane Sauer, wanted to hone their skills, so they put themselves at the mercy of a formidable teacher and mentor, a professor in the architecture school at Washington University in St. Louis. Their teacher and mentor is the man we eulogize today, the late Leslie J. Laskey. Laskey's role in the development of these artists and so many, many others was not as a technician. That is, he did not teach Jane Sauer to produce sculptures from wire and threads, nor did he instruct Heltzel in stitchery. Rather, Sauer told me, he dealt with the conceptual side of the artists' educations, and he helped to develop their talents with inspiration. Sauer said he was able to encourage us, to help us to learn to explore. He was tough, too demanding, acerbic, hurtful, some thought, and relentless. He regarded the work of the designer, of the architect, to be of the highest purpose, and that impulse guided his criticism. 55 years ago, when I first learned there was this monument of art called Laskey, dwelling in Gibbons Hall, I was merely an onlooker, an English major and art history student who occasionally strayed down from Brookings Quadrangle or from Steinberg Hall into Gibbons. I had no real contact with him then. I simply viewed him from afar with curiosity, mingled with fear. Were I to be ushered into his presence, I was certain to say something lame, and if he deigned to respond, he would certainly crush me. Over time, I became neither architect nor historian, but a writer and observer, and I lost my fear of the great man. I came to have a genuinely satisfying relationship as a friend, a recipient of advice, and a source of ideas. I realized in knowing him and looking at his work that rather than slowing down physically or intellectually, artistically, the older he became, the more ambitiously he built upon the sense of authority I deserved as a graduate student and began to appreciate much more fully as time went on. I'm prone to believing that artists are able to defy the process of aging, wrote Ivy Cooper, the St. Louis Beacon's art critic, in a review of an exhibition called Maturity and Its Muse at the Sheldon Art Galleries. Cooper declared that once artists have reached a level of technical achievement and confidence in expression, they become timeless in a way, impervious to the effects of the passing years, suspended blissfully in their artistic stride. This belief no doubt stems from the will to deny my own aging and pending mortality, Cooper said. I would agree with her completely. The show featured the work of 40 St. Louis artists over 70 years old, still hard at work. Among the exhibited were Robert Pettis, Ken Worley, Mary Sprague, Peter Shank, Martin Schweig, Elaine Blatt, Marjorie Heltzel, and now, of course, the dear departed Leslie Laskey. In his university years, all the while he was teaching, Leslie worked also as a painter, sculptor, and printmaker, as a designer of jewelry, as a photographer, as a creator of lighting fixtures and furniture, not to mention his work as a poet. He exhibited frequently in galleries around town, at Washington University, at his partner Frank Schweiger's St. Louis Xanadu, in New York and in North Carolina, in Philadelphia and London. The university honored him numerous times for his work and his teaching. Just as Laskey was as loath to admit that he might be less than correct in his pronouncements, he developed a firm, authoritative, and recognizable style early on and stuck with it. Within this rigorous, disciplined aesthetic and stylistic framework, Leslie produced art of great intellectual depth and ringing lyricism. The Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes reminds us there is a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. But it seemed to me, writing this, that there is a time to do all of this at once, and this is such a time. Laskey, approaching his 100th birthday, would undoubtedly be working today on a picture or a poem or a proclamation had his body not given up on him. At the moment of his death, within days of his centenary, it was a time without doubt to mourn. Thus a great artist, warrior, and patriot died and took with him hundreds of works of art stored in his mind, pictures and poems and stories and criticisms and praises awaiting the animation of his genius. For such we should mourn, for we will miss him. He'd prefer, however, that we dance and sing songs of praise for a life lived so abundantly, one shared with us with affection and with vivid and artful generosity. Thank you very much.
Leslie was a seasoned Givens Hall citizen when I arrived in the fall of 1960. I was assigned to teach architecture 311, 312, the architectural design sequence, which during the first year of the implementation of the then new 4+2 program, my students had just emerged from the baptismal fire of the famous Leslie Laskey sophomore design studio. The most naturally gifted teacher among all of us, Leslie thinned the number of architectural sophomores who should not have been there in the first place. He injected inventive thinking into the students promoted to the next level, and I was the beneficiary of it. Leslie's energetic, triumphant, and by design slightly late arrival to his anxiously waiting students of his first fall semester class would push them into all different directions of search, excitement, and confusion. Miraculously, by the end of the project, the evidence of drawings and models in the walls would confirm the remarkable learning that had occurred under his confident guidance. Folding and interlocking cardboard sheets had a great presence in the sophomore design studio at the time when Lopata Hall of the School of Engineering was under construction. With no need to retrieve it, cardboard formwork was used for the first floor slab to address heaving soil problems in the building side. When the cardboard formwork was laid out in full view, covering the total floor areas of the building, there were adequate reasons for a campus-wide rumor to spread that Leslie's sophomore class was erecting Lopata Hall, providing the university with extra savings in building materials. Incidentally, the cardboard framework is still in the crawl space under the building atrium, exceeding by decades the purpose of its original use. Leslie shied away from speeches, but I always found thoughtful sense in his brief aphorisms. Early in my teaching days, when I was deeply focused on my passional assignments, Leslie suggested that I did not have to do what Passional was asking me to do, a neophyte's introduction to the challenges of academic freedom. In addition to the academic, Leslie and I established personal contact early when he announced to me that one of his grandmothers was Greek. In retirement, we enjoyed frequent lunch meetings and repeated opportunities for me to admire his endless and remarkable productivity. Leslie's presence in Givens Hall provided for me innumerable learning and teaching opportunities, certainly enhancing my appreciation of academic life. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Jim Harris. Leslie Laskey was my teacher twice First when I was 19, and again when I was 50. He was a supportive colleague at the school, and he was my mentor. Laskey was a gifted teacher, and he was a true artist. He was my first design instructor when I arrived at Washington University to study architecture. For a small-town kid away from home for the first time, he was formidable. He looked very exotic. He shaved his head. I knew only one other man who shaved his head, and that was Yul Brynner, a movie star, the king of Siam. Laskey was the king of basic design. He was equally macho and regal. In those days, he spoke with a booming voice, he didn't mince words, and he smoked Marlboros. Many of us smoked Marlboros by the end of that year. Alan Apple probably still does. We called him Professor Laskey, or just Laskey, a single name befitting a rock star. Only his friends called him Leslie. They say that fear motivates. I was very motivated that year. I worked hard. I learned a lot. I doubt if at that time I would have called him a gifted teacher. He was, well, motivating. Years later, I became a faculty member and taught with Laskey. Well, with is a bit presumptive. I was there with him and was his chorus. But I got to watch him give a project and work through it. The following semester, I would give the same project to my summer school class. I was very lucky to have gotten to teach that way, modeling my performance on a master. He was indeed a gifted teacher. After 20 years of making and teaching architecture, I wanted to add something new. I decided to make woodblock prints. Leslie, as I had then come to call him, took me on. So at age 50, I again had Leslie as my teacher. I studied with him in Michigan nearly every summer for over 20 years. Sometimes I would stay a week, most often 2. I might be with him all day, or a couple times during the day, or every other day. It depended on what he assigned. That's when I got to know Laskey, the artist. I'd always heard that artists had to make art. I never understood that until watching Leslie. He made art or was involved in an art activity like framing or cutting mats every day. Often I would have dinner with him, perhaps with others. Dishes were done, and we left for our beds. Arriving the next morning, I would find a new drawing or a collage produced after we were gone. He didn't sleep that much. He worked while we dozed. There is something empowering about creating while others sleep. Perhaps that emboldened his art. After finding work in the kitchen or on the harvest table in the main house or pinned to a sheet of drywall standing in the corner, I said to him, "Leslie, you work everywhere. It's my house. I can work where I want." And he did. He would clear a small space. He had to clear a space because the house was so full of stuff. Leslie loved to shop and collect. It could be an antique store, a garage sale, a thrift store, the bargain barn, or the shore of Lake Michigan. Leslie constantly brought in treasure. "Have you ever considered a loft?" I asked. "Oh no," he said, "too much space. I like to make the right place for my work." One time we were driving down Lakeshore Drive. "Look at that," he said. It was a group of mailboxes supported by a single post. Around the turn, there were a couple of others with varying ideas about the perpendicular. Then a single at a jaunty angle. It was exciting to see what would come next. "Isn't it fun being a visual person?" he said. And Leslie was truly a visual person. He was excited by what he saw. He created delightful rooms which were never long the same. He brought in new and interesting plants for his garden. He shopped the markets for good food, always finding new ways to prepare and present it. He cooked not from recipes, but what looked right. But most of all, he loved translating that joy into art. Marvelous, terrific. Why didn't I think of that earlier? Amazing. Leslie found real joy in the visual world, and for nearly 100 years, he spread that joy around. Lucky us.
Good morning. My name is Mikey Nauchus. I met Leslie about 20 years ago through my friend Jim Harris, also in the classroom. It was interesting to hear Jim's description of that because I similarly felt as though, despite being together teaching in the classroom, I'm not sure that that was equal. Some of you began a relationship with Leslie as a teacher. For me, it wasn't quite that. But I do think our friendship was based on a mutual desire to exchange ideas. I think he related to a lot of people that way, probing with questions about what you're reading, what you're working on, maybe what you cooked last night for dinner. In the spirit of that exchange that we had together, here are some ideas that I cultivated from my friendship with Leslie that I'd like to share with you today. Be playful. I think about playfulness a lot because of Leslie. Phone conversations with Leslie would often begin something like, "Oh, where have you been, you SOB? You don't write, you don't call." And then he would thank me for calling. More broadly, I think Leslie used play as a way of engaging with the world, not just with the people around him. I think Leslie gave all of us some kind of permission, or maybe a mandate, to be playful and play in the world. And in retrospect, I think spending time with Leslie felt that way for me, like being invited to come over and play. Practice curiosity and pay attention. A few years ago in Michigan, Leslie and I took Louis for the requisite early evening walk down the road. And later that night, Leslie told me that he enjoyed watching me navigate space, responding to where Louis wanted to be on one side or the other of us. He said it was like watching a dance. And everything for Leslie was fodder for new curiosity. A walk becomes a dance, the dance becomes a woodcut, the woodcut becomes a poem, the poem becomes a painting, the painting becomes a sculpture. There might be something there, but you have to look for it. How many times did Leslie convince each of us that he had found the perfect jam or cheese or salted cracker, and then reveal later that it was discovered at Trader Joe's? I love the way Leslie extracted richness out of the many little things of life. But it wasn't just about the stuff, the consumables. The first time, and I think every time I shared a meal with Leslie, he told me where to sit or who I should sit beside. I loved that. It felt like he was saying, there might be something interesting here, you just have to be in the right spot to find it. I shared the following with Frank shortly after Leslie passed, but I think it's worth sharing with all of you here today. I believe one of the greatest gifts Leslie gave, over and over again, is the lasting connection we all have to each other that we may not have otherwise have shared. He connected so many people, and I'm thankful to know all of you, to share some bits of life with you, exchange ideas, live with playfulness, and hopefully an endless supply of curiosity.
Hello. I recently watched this very cool YouTube video about tuning forks. I had not thought too much about this physics phenomenon, but there it was. How a tuning fork of a certain size and setting, when struck, will vibrate others of the same size and setting, and importantly, only vibrate ones set to the same chord. Other ones don't have a response. It's a physics property, and it is like magic. As a teacher, that's how I felt he talked to us, magically, not magically, as if we were tuned to the same wavelength. If the dial was set right, you could get at this amazing station. How lucky were we? As students, this is what Leslie has done with us. He has tuned us, we could hear his shorthand, we could hear words of design, we can see art. We can pick up on the distinct way he spoke about things. We can hear it in each other, too. The resonance has transmitted across the way. There are these idioms like dialed in or on the same wavelength. Did he form us? Or were we like that and found him? Maybe it doesn't matter. Some months back, Leslie asked me to write out an essay for someone who was writing an article about him, and would I write about what it was like to be his student? Not terribly surprising, the assignment was a bit vague and cryptic. He didn't say how long or for whom or when he needed it. At any rate, it was interesting to think about, and so I wrote it and shared this with him. I first had Professor Laskey when I was an 18-year-old undergraduate. As his design students, intentionally, there was not going to be a clear to us rubric, and when we thought we might have an answer, the question, the problem would change again and again. He was very serious with us, but we were seen. Personally speaking, I often strained to understand what he meant. It was a bit like receiving life-saving, urgent instruction from a poet. It was so important, but what does he mean exactly? He resisted answers that flattened any possibilities. He didn't teach his classes to impart some sort of concrete knowledge. He conditioned us, trained and shaped us to be better thinkers, more creative, more open, more discerning, more persistent, faster, more iterative, bolder. We were making things. What was the core of the issue? It was not a chair per se, it was seating. And what did that mean? Design mattered, process mattered. It was interactive with him. We had to work to offer something up, and with his sonorous voice and gestural thumb, we were sat back down. The critiques could be caustic or heroic, and they were honest. He respected us enough to not coddle. Like his magical way of sending ideas across sine waves, he could speak obliquely too, offering criticism to one student and then looking right at you to see if you understood that that comment was for you too. One time I had come to class after some sort of difficult moment earlier, and he happened to be by the door. Professor Laskey stopped me momentarily, and gripped my shoulder, and swatted away above my head as if to shoo away gnats. The job done. No words. Bad vibe gone. It was such a kindness. As we got a little farther along, he would have batches of students over to his house for dinner, a dozen or so at a time. We'd sit on the floor and have vegetarian chili. It was what I imagined salons to be like. There were piles of books, unusual music, art, and sophistication well beyond my years or background. By inviting us in, he shared himself, his eye, his attitude, and how he pulled out the aesthetic from the highest and the lowest brow of objects. How light, form, material, pattern, color, a range of visual and other sensate qualities could transform the stage that was his living room and create its own internal magic. His house was an environment, and it was constantly resetting. Handsome, resonant, strong. Professor Laskey kept so many of his former students in his life. So many former students kept Leslie in their lives. Where else are you ever going to find someone like this? It was worth the risk. He showed us how to socialize very casually at a simple seat in his kitchen. My kids have called him Leslie much more easily than I, but I got there maybe after the first 20 years or so. He encouraged me to paint and draw, and I do. He picked up his phone. Reading and TV. Art making, current events, and family updates were our recent overlaps. He crowded his living room and his garden in Manistee with various types of chairs. Chairs, seating if you will, all different and interesting, some not so comfortable. The chairs felt to me like the great collection of former students, friends, and personalities he circled around him. We are all profoundly lucky to have been in that great space. And thank you, Leslie. Thank you.
I'm having this elderly environment that I can't get rid of. But here, my eyeballs, I think, are just as young as they ever were. I'm walking on the street, and I walk with that walker I have, and people will cross the street to get out of the way, in a way, when they think that they're going to, in my mind, they think that they're going to catch old age, and they already have it, and you have a hard time living with that. So the age is not dangerous, right? Perhaps it's slow, but it's not dangerous. I found this box, and I was throwing it out for trash, and I was making it smaller, and I suddenly thought that there were enough shutters and enough parts and enough graphics to really astound people. You can see here, I transposed, I put this down here. You can see these things as I open them up. I have to invent a language in order to make it mine, and that language has to doing a vocabulary for that language takes time. So you pick up, you get the clues that may work, and which formulate the idea. So I could have been in New York and more of a designer than a teacher, but I made a choice, and the rewards have been great, but there always has been that horizon out there that, yes, but this is better, right? If the truth were really known, I think that teaching is a very sensual business. You have to make yourself as vulnerable as possible for interchange at whatever level you're discussing. I don't think it necessarily is sexual, but I think that it's very volatile, and I can't do it any other way. But I sometimes get annoyed because I set up the room to have people be able to talk with 3 people and then 4 people or 2 people. And some bastard changes the chair and louses up my idea, right? I think we all have a certain amount of magic. And a certain number of, or a certain amount of prescience, right, of looking forward. If you're, I think, number one with meditation or keeping this channel open, I think you can perceive you perceive much more than probably you want. Actually, I don't think about age at all. I think about now, and I'm happy that I'm now, right, instead of then or there, right? It amazes me, and I like being amazed. Just discovering a new puzzle and trying to solve that puzzle with both physically and intellectually. I'm delighted. Actually, I like finding an arena in which to write your problem, right? To pose your problem, whether it's a piece of scrap paper or a piece of, elegant paper. You have to respond to it immediately. You have to find it. You have to own it, I think. If it's a space that makes you uncomfortable, then I start obliterating it or trying to lose it so I could find it again. Sometimes you have to just leave it alone. I did think about the idea that I should have a towel, but by the way, if you want to see something really breathtaking, come here. Look through that crack of the doorway with the light and the black and the shadow and the fabulous. God. Wow. Anyway, yes. After that, we should have a cup of coffee. I love the Gandhi thing about each one teach one, and where you bring your ideas and your ideals and present them and exchange them for new things. If people are bringing or letting you change, or you're being able to change with every person that you come into contact with. 'Cause, as I always say, I learn more from other people than they learn from me, but we grow together and we make those things work, I think. So I look forward to new adventures with people, discovering new people and finding out where they go or where they might intersect with my work or ideas, or the next meal that I'll have that I can work with and share with other people. Well, I think about it in terms of the choices I've made over time. Suddenly there were I was at school in New York, and why did Bill tell me I shouldn't be there? And why did he get me into ID? And why did the person who knew another person bring me from ID to North Carolina to Washington U? I mean, this is one big question, or quest, one could say. And, luck maybe why? No. Maybe why is luck? Well, that's profound. Well, I want to be as eternally curious. I don't want to settle for a mediocre answer. God, that line, that shadow, looks like it's right outside the window. Look. The more you look, the more you see. And supposedly. All right. Be back in a flash. I looked out the window this morning. It was all foggy, and yet on one of the trees in the back, it's decorated with red leaves, which are to host the rest of fall. Right? I like the idea of being able to play with words, like like you play with images, right? Where you try to find the, unlock the secret that gives you pattern, right? Or sound, or I do most of my writing walking, so where I hope I remember by the time I go. For me, it's very verbal at first, where you have to think about it. You combine words to, find if they echo, see if they resonate more than that, so that you can remember them or repeat them. You find a kind of beat. I want to hear it up here before I write it. And you have to find that in painting. You have to find out what our echoes are, and try to uncover what the problem is. How can I talk about this more, right? Until you exhaust yourself. You know that that's the process, but the process is changing all the time. It's never predictable, and so you bump into stones on the walk, and that changes direction. So, God damn it, I have to go there now. And then you're going along, and then there's another bump, and so that's the secret. It is a puzzle, so but it doesn't have an end. I think about the abundance of experience and terror and music and the kind of paths I've been on, and the changes that I've gone through, and I've seen, and I have a terrible habit. I don't think about it. I don't think about the end, and sometimes that scares me. Not the end, but the fact that I'm not going to be able to finish what I want to do. I'm too busy. And so that's how you have to. That's how you keep going. Oh, excuse me. I couldn't die today because I have wood blocks to do.
Thank you. This concludes the Graham Chapel part of our celebration. We would particularly like to thank Ali Abrams and Leslie Zutwalk from Alumni House for making the arrangements for this gathering. A lot went into it, and we're most appreciative. We thank you to our speakers, our filmmakers, and our flautist for your contributions. As I expect all of you know by now, or most of you know by now, Carmen Colangelo, the Dean of the Sam Fox School, has organized a tour of all the new parts of the campus that have been built up over the last many years. That will start at 12 noon. So we encourage those of you who are going to go on that tour to do your visiting on the way. A number of people from Alumni House will be here to escort you down to Weil Hall on campus. And we just want to thank you very much for coming. Good day. And we'll see, there is, of course, the gathering this evening. Sorry, I meant to mention that. And that will be at 8 p.m. At Frank's house, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
There are glories are crocuses,